Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive, the podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it
We examine the pieces.
and expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so today we are strapping ourselves in, maybe metaphorically, maybe literally thinking about an ice bath. We're taking a really close look, a deep dive into the Wim Hof method, WHM, huge in wellness, biohacking.
Absolutely huge. And our sort of core question today, the thesis, really digs into that whole wellness promise, doesn't it?
It does.
What if this whole idea, this promise of unlocking superhuman potential with things like the Wim Hof method, what if it's not just, slightly exaggerated?
More than just hype.
Exactly. What if it's actually designed, maybe even systematically, to get you hooked, dependent on a new kind of guru?
Right, but this guru isn't wearing robes. They're wrapped in, the appearance of science.
Science and rebellion. That's the powerful combo, making you pay for the privilege of fighting the system.
It's a really fascinating angle because the story around Wim Hof, the Iceman, it isn't really built on, dry scientific papers in the public eye.
No, not at all. It's built on these incredible, almost impossible feats.
Yeah, things that make you go, how is that even possible? The whole idea relies on us seeing him as this anomaly, someone rewriting the basic rules of being human.
And you absolutely need that. If you're going to sell something revolutionary, or frame it that way, you need a figurehead who seems revolutionary themselves. Wim Hof, born 1959, he didn't just get the nickname the Iceman.
No, it feels very deliberate.
It's meticulously crafted. It's a persona, a brand, an archetype, and it's all built on things you can see, things that seem to just defy biology.
And the stories, the feats we hear about, they're not just footnotes. They are the core mythology. They're what turns someone from thinking, that's crazy, to, maybe I should try this.
We're talking about stuff that really cements him as, well, a physiological outlier, way beyond what standard science textbooks say we can do.
Okay, so let's talk specifics. The Guinness World Record, that's a big one.
Huge one. Full body contact with ice. Back in 2007, he stayed submerged for, get this, 1 hour, 52 minutes, and 42 seconds.
Wow. Okay, for anyone listening, just imagine that. For most people, that amount of time leads to severe hypothermia. Dangerous stuff.
Life-threatening, yeah. So that single achievement immediately frames him as someone who's just different, immune to cold in a way we aren't.
But it wasn't just about enduring cold passively, was it? He pushed limits in other extreme ways, too.
Right. He combined endurance with this cold resistance. Think about the marathon run in the Namib Desert. Super hot, obviously. He did it, apparently, without drinking any water, which, that flies in the face of everything we know about endurance and hydration and heat.
It sounds physiologically impossible, frankly.
It pushes right up against that line. And then maybe the most famous one, the Everest attempt.
Ah, yes. The shorts-only climb.
Shorts only, up Mount Everest. He reached 7,400 meters. That's incredibly high.
That's well into the death zone, isn't it? Where the oxygen levels are just too low for humans long-term.
Exactly. Not enough oxygen to sustain life for long. And he's there, basically in beachwear. The climb eventually stopped because of a foot injury, reportedly, not because the altitude or cold got him.
So these stories, these feats, they're not random. They're carefully selected and presented to build this superhuman archetype.
Precisely. It sets up the narrative. If Wim Hof can do this, then maybe his method isn't just some random breeding exercise. It justifies him calling himself a pioneer, a guinea pig.
Right. The implied message becomes, look, the science you learned is incomplete. I found something innate, something powerful inside us all.
And my method. It's the key. It's the shortcut to finding your inner superhuman.
And without that foundation, without that belief in him as extraordinary, selling the method itself would be much harder.
If science could easily explain him, he'd just be an interesting case study. An extreme athlete, maybe.
But because his feats seem to defy easy explanation, he gets positioned as this rebel mystic, someone unlocking ancient secrets.
Which is a much more compelling sales pitch.
So what is the method then? What are these secrets he supposedly unlocked and packaging up for sale?
Well, the WHM, as it's presented, boils down to 3 core pillars. 3 components that together promise something pretty radical.
Which is?
Voluntary control. Conscious control over body systems, we're usually told, are automatic. Things like the autonomic nervous system, inflammation, even how our body regulates temperature.
Stuff that's supposed to be completely outside our conscious command.
That's the claim. So let's define those 3 pillars clearly before we start taking them apart.
Okay, pillar 1.
The breathing technique. It's a specific form of, essentially, voluntary hyperventilation.
Pillar 2.
Cold exposure. But not just random cold plunges. It's taught as a systematic, gradual process of adaptation, training the body.
And pillar 3.
This one's mental. It's mindset, focus, commitment. The mental willpower aspect.
Okay, so breathing, cold, mindset. These 3 together are the package deal.
That's the package. And the promise is that mastering these gives you conscious influence over your internal world nervous system, inflammation, body heat.
Right, let's start with the breathing then, because that seems to be the part people feel most immediately, right? It gives that instant feedback.
Exactly. It's the hook. It delivers a powerful, undeniable physiological kick. Pillar 1, the breathing. It really is the system's initial grab. It gives you this immediate, intense, subjective feeling, like you just flipped a switch and accessed some kind of power.
A controlled chemical shock, you called it.
That's a good way to put it, because it is controlled. You're doing it deliberately, but it definitely shocks the system chemically.
Okay, so walk us through the protocol. What exactly are people doing when they practice this voluntary hyperventilation?
Right. It involves about 30 to 40 cycles of really deep, forceful breathing. Think maximal inhales, often through the mouth or nose, followed by just letting the breath go passively, not forcing it out, just releasing.
So it's not like calm, meditative breathing. It's aggressive.
Very aggressive. You're deliberately trying to overturn the body's normal respiratory balance. It's an active disruption.
Okay, 30, 40 cycles of that. Then what?
Then comes the crucial part, the breath retention. After the last passive exhale, you hold your breath, but you hold it out with lungs relatively empty.
For how long?
It varies a lot with training, but people aim for, 1 minute, 2 minutes, sometimes even 3 minutes or more.
Holding your breath out for 3 minutes, that sounds intense.
It is intense. And then after that long hold, there's a deep recovery breath in, which you hold for about 15 seconds, and then you start the next round or finish. That whole cycle, hyperventilation, hold out, recovery breath, that's the engine driving the immediate effects.
Okay, let's get into the chemistry then. What is actually happening in the blood that makes this feel so powerful? Why the lightheadedness, the tingling, the reported euphoria?
It all starts with blood gases, primarily carbon dioxide, CO2. When you hyperventilate that forcefully, you are blowing off CO2 way faster than your body produces it.
Right. CO2 is a waste product of metabolism, but we need some level of it.
We do. It regulates pH, breathing drive, lots of things. Yeah. But this technique drastically reduces your blood's CO2 levels. This state is called hypocapnia.
Hypocapnia. Low CO2. And what does that do chemically?
CO2 forms carbonic acid in the blood.
Yeah.
So if you rapidly remove CO2, you remove the acid. This causes the blood pH to rise sharply, becoming more alkaline. This state is called respiratory alkalosis.
Alkalosis. Higher pH. How high are we talking?
The source material suggests this breathing can push blood pH up to around 7.7, maybe even a bit higher in some cases.
Okay, pause there. Normal blood pH is super tightly controlled, right? Like 7.35 to 7.45.
Exactly. The body works incredibly hard to keep it in that narrow window. Hitting 7.7 is a massive acute shift. It's a significant chemical disruption.
And that disruption is what causes those physical sensations.
That's a huge part of it, yes. The tingling, the lightheadedness, sometimes even muscle cramps or tetany in the hands. It's your nervous system reacting to this sudden alkaline shift. It literally feels like an altered state because chemically, your body is in an altered state, a state of shock, really.
Okay, so that explains the immediate feeling. But what about the oxygen claims? The method often talks about maximizing oxygen, hyperoxygenating tissues.
Right, and this is where the narrative gets a bit slippery, where the Bohr effect controversy is really important to understand.
Okay, break down the Bohr effect for us in this context. This sounds critical.
Okay, so normally the Bohr effect is how your body ensures oxygen gets delivered where it's needed most. When tissues work hard, they produce CO2 and lactic acid, which lowers the local pH.
Makes sense. More acidic environment around working muscles.
And that lower pH signals hemoglobin, the protein carrying oxygen in your red blood cells, to release its oxygen more easily. So oxygen gets dumped precisely where metabolism is high. It's elegant.
Okay, so lower pH helps oxygen release.
Yes, but the WHM breathing does the opposite. By causing respiratory alkalosis, that high pH of 7.7.
It makes the hemoglobin cling more tightly to oxygen.
Exactly. You shift the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left. So yes, during the hyperventilation phase, your arterial oxygen saturation might hit 100%. Your blood is technically full of oxygen.
Oh.
But your tissues, including your brain, actually struggle to get that oxygen off the hemoglobin because the chemical signal for release, the lower pH, isn't there. In fact, the signal is the opposite.
Wait a minute. So you're breathing like crazy, feeling this intense rush. Your blood is saturated, but the oxygen is essentially locked onto the truck. It's not getting delivered efficiently to the muscles or brain.
That's the physiological reality of severe alkalosis and the Bohr effect working in reverse. It doesn't quite align with the simple hyperoxygenation story, does it?
Not at all. So where does the feeling of power, energy, and focus actually come from, if not primarily from extra oxygen delivery?
It comes from a massive stress response, the adrenergic spike, adrenaline and noradrenaline, epinephrine and norepinephrine. The Radboud University studies in 2014 measured this directly. They found significant spikes in these stress hormones in WHM practitioners during the method.
So we're intentionally triggering the fight-or-flight response, flooding our bodies with stress hormones on command.
You are essentially hitting the panic button voluntarily. It confirms the technique kicks the sympathetic nervous system into high gear. And that massive adrenaline dump is what creates the intense feeling of focus, energy, perceived clarity, and maybe even reduced pain perception.
Which people then interpret
as superhuman control or direct immune influence or unlocking potential. And we even see changes in brainwave patterns, altered EEG readings that are totally consistent with this kind of massive sympathetic nervous system activation.
Okay, so pillar one is basically a self-induced chemical and hormonal roller coaster. It creates a powerful, albeit temporary state that feels like enhanced capability.
Exactly. Which makes pillar three, the mindset part, absolutely crucial. You need that mental frame to interpret this physiological storm as something positive and controllable.
Right. Let's move on to the other pillars then. The cold and the mind.
Okay, pillar two, the cold discipline. This is quite different from the breath work. While the breathing gives you that immediate acute chemical jolt, the cold exposure is about systematic training, forcing real, long-term physiological adaptation through repeated stress.
And it's not just grin and bear it, right? The sources describe a very structured, step-by-step approach. You don't just dive into a frozen lake on day one.
Definitely not, or you shouldn't anyway. It typically starts small, very manageably, like finishing your regular warm shower with maybe 30 seconds, then a minute, then 2 minutes of cold water.
Building tolerance gradually.
Exactly. Then maybe moving on to more controlled immersions, like dedicated ice baths, maybe starting shorter and colder over time. And eventually, for some, it progresses to things like extended outdoor exposure in minimal clothing, like Hof himself does. Consistency is key, forcing the body to adapt.
And unlike some of the more subjective feelings from the breathing, there are actual measurable physiological changes happening here, aren't there? Adaptations beyond just mental toughness.
Oh yes, absolutely. These are verifiable. The big one is the activation and potential growth of brown adipose tissue, or BAT.
Brown fat, not the regular white fat that stores energy.
Right. BAT is metabolically active. Its job is to burn energy, specifically fat and glucose, to generate heat, like your body's internal furnace. This process is called non-shivering thermogenesis.
So by regularly exposing yourself to cold, you're essentially training this brown fat to become more active and maybe even increase in volume.
That's the principle, and research supports it. You become better at generating your own heat without needing to shiver violently. It's a genuine adaptation to become more metabolically efficient in the cold.
You're upgrading your internal thermostat in a way.
Pretty much. And this adaptation goes hand in hand with significant hormonal changes. Cold exposure is a powerful trigger for norepinephrine release.
Norepinephrine again. Same hormone involved in the breathing spike.
The very same, but triggered differently and potentially with more sustained effects from cold adaptation. The data we looked at indicates cold exposure can boost norepinephrine levels to about 2.5 times the baseline. That's a substantial increase.
And what does that norepinephrine boost do in the context of cold?
It's crucial for managing blood flow. It causes vasoconstriction, narrowing of blood vessels in the skin and extremities to keep core body temperature stable.
Which leads to another adaptation, better vasoconstriction, vasodilation control.
Exactly. Repeatedly forcing your blood vessels to constrict in the cold and then dilate again when warming up essentially trains this system. Your body gets better and faster at regulating blood flow between your core and your periphery. This contributes to that feeling of robustness, of handling the cold better.
Okay, so these are real, tangible benefits of cold stress. Increased heat production via BAT, hormonal changes like norepinephrine, better blood flow control, things largely backed up by general cryotherapy research too.
Correct. The WHM packages and systematizes this cold stress principle.
Right.
These adaptations are not necessarily unique to the WHM, but the method provides a framework for achieving them.
Right. Now let's connect this to pillar 3, mindset, focus, and commitment. This sounds a bit fuzzier, like standard self-help advice, but you suggested it plays a specific neurological role here.
It does more than just stay positive. It acts as a crucial neurological bridge, especially when facing the extreme discomfort of the breath holds or the ice bath. Think about what's happening in the brain.
Okay.
The intense cold or the feeling of suffocation during a breath hold triggers a primal fear response, largely driven by the amygdala. That's the brain's ancient alarm system yelling, "Danger, get out."
Makes sense. Survival instinct.
But pillar 3 is about consciously engaging the prefrontal cortex, PFC, the more evolved part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and impulse control.
The brain's CEO, basically.
Yeah. Right. By intentionally focusing, staying committed, and reframing the stress as beneficial during the intense experience, the PFC can actively modulate or dampen the amygdala's panic signal.
So you're using your conscious mind, your focus, to override the automatic fear response.
That's the idea. You're consciously telling the alarm system, it's okay, we've got this, stay calm, even when every physical signal is screaming the opposite.
And that experience, that feeling of overriding instinct, that must feel incredibly empowering.
Hugely empowering.
Yeah.
It creates the subjective experience of mind over matter. You're not just passively enduring, you feel like you are actively controlling a fundamental survival response, proving to yourself that your mind, through sheer commitment, can influence bodily reactions previously thought to be automatic.
That sense of mastery would be powerfully addictive psychologically.
Extremely reinforcing. So you see how the pillars lock together. The breath gives the immediate chemical rush and feeling of power. The cold provides the tangible adaptation and proof of resilience over time. And the mindset allows you to frame the whole ordeal not as suffering, but as a triumph of will and control.
It's a potent psychological cocktail. Okay, but now we need to apply that same critical lens to the evidence used to support the bigger claims, especially around health and immunity. Where does the science actually stand versus the marketing?
Right. When you look at how the WHM gained mainstream traction and scientific credibility, it really hinges on a couple of key studies.
Yeah.
Especially the work done at Radboud University in the Netherlands.
This is the study people always mention when they talk about proving the method affects the immune system, isn't it?
That's the one.
Yeah.
It was a game changer for Hof's public profile. It took him from being this sort of eccentric Iceman figure to someone with actual scientific data, however limited, backing his claims.
Okay, so what exactly did that 2014 Radboud study show? What were the findings that got everyone so excited?
The setup was clever and pretty bold. They took a group of trained WHM practitioners, 12 of them specifically.
12. Okay, keep that number in mind.
12. And they injected them with a component of E. coli bacteria and endotoxin. This stuff reliably triggers a strong inflammatory response in the body, mimicking a bacterial infection. You get fever, chills, headache, classic flu-like symptoms.
A controlled way to induce inflammation. And what happened?
The WHM group practiced their breathing technique before and during this endotoxin challenge. And the results, compared to a control group who didn't do the method, were striking.
How so?
The practitioners showed a significantly reduced inflammatory response. They measured key inflammatory signaling molecules, cytokines like IL-6 and IL-8, and the levels were much lower in the WHM group.
Lower inflammation markers.
And importantly, the practitioners also reported far fewer flu-like symptoms. They felt less sick than the control group.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds pretty compelling. Lower inflammation, fewer symptoms. It really looks like they consciously influenced their immune response through the breathing and mindset, likely via that adrenaline spike we talked about.
It strongly suggested that the sympathetic nervous system activation, the adrenaline surge, was indeed dampening the immediate inflammatory cascade. That part seems plausible, like hitting the brakes on the immune system's initial overreaction.
But there's always a but in deconstruction.
There's always a but. And here, the buts are significant. These are the crucial limitations that often get conveniently glossed over in the promotional material and popular accounts.
Let's hear them. We started with the sample size, N equals 12.
Tiny. That's pilot study territory, not definitive proof for a global phenomenon. And has it been widely replicated independently since 2014 on a larger scale? Not really. That initial study remains the bedrock. There was no active control group. The comparison was against people doing nothing. What if a group doing intense meditation, or maybe even just focused relaxation, showed similar effects? We don't know.
Good point. You need to compare it to other interventions, not just inaction.
And maybe the biggest issue. Severe self-selection bias. These 12 participants weren't average Joes pulled off the street. They were highly trained, deeply committed WHM practitioners. They were likely already healthy, motivated, and believed strongly in the method's power.
So the study proved that these specific 12 people, who were already outliers in their dedication, could achieve this result.
Exactly. It did not prove the method is universally effective, easily learned by anyone, safe for everyone, or necessarily superior to other stress management techniques.
But the narrative that emerged was much grander, wasn't it? Taking that very specific finding and extrapolating it wildly.
Precisely. It became Wim Hof method lets you control your immune system. Full stop. The caveats, the context, the limitations all faded into the background. That's the scientific license in action.
Okay, what about other evidence? There was an fMRI study too, right? Looking at the brain during cold exposure.
Yes, the Wayne State University study from 2018. They put practitioners in cold suits and scanned their brains using fMRI. They found increased activity in a specific brain region called the periaqueductal gray matter, or PAG.
I've heard of that. Isn't it involved in things like pain modulation and autonomic control, sort of like a relay station?
It is. It's a really interesting area involved in coordinating responses to stress and pain. So finding increased activity there during cold exposure makes sense. The brain is clearly working hard to manage the stress.
And the interpretation promoted by the WHM community was
that they found the control center. Proof that the method allows conscious access to these deep regulatory parts of the brain.
But again, the deconstructionist lens.
Again, the critical caveat, which to their credit the researchers themselves noted, this shows correlation, not causation.
Meaning, the brain area is active while they do the method and endure cold, but it doesn't prove the method caused that specific activation pattern or that it's the only way to activate it.
Exactly. The brain is working hard, no surprise there.
Yeah.
The fMRI shows where it's working. It doesn't explain the how definitively, nor does it prove the WHM is unique in engaging it, or quantify safety or long-term effects. And again, small sample size.
So this pattern emerges. Take an intriguing but limited finding, strip away the crucial context and limitations,
and present it as solid proof of concept.
Huh.
This creates a powerful narrative shield.
Explain that.
The movement selectively cites these studies, the lower IL-6, the PAG activation, because they sound impressive and scientific. They confer this aura of authority. Because the studies are real, the whole method gains this veneer of being scientifically validated.
Even if the validation is paper-thin or based on very specific limited circumstances.
Exactly. The public hears science proves, but they don't hear the in 12 highly selected individuals under specific laboratory conditions with no active controls and results pending replication.
And that illusion of proven universal control is what justifies the whole enterprise, isn't it? The courses, the retreats, the brand.
It's absolutely central to the value proposition. Yeah. If it was just breathing deeply might make you feel good, it's not a $1,000 workshop. It's science shows you can control your biology. That's the sell. Okay, so moving beyond just those selectively highlighted studies, when we apply a more rigorous lens to the overall methodology and the claims made for WHM, some serious flaws and, maybe more importantly, omissions become apparent.
Things that should make anyone considering this, especially for therapeutic reasons, stop and think critically.
Absolutely. And the first biggest one, the elephant in the room for so many wellness interventions, is the placebo effect.
Ah, yes, the power of belief. How much of the reported benefit is just that?
It's almost impossible to rule out with the current state of research. Think about the setup. You have a charismatic figure, Hof, promising extraordinary abilities. You're engaging in rituals that are physically intense and demanding the breathing, the ice, often in a group setting with shared belief.
That's a potent cocktail for expectancy bias. You expect to feel amazing, powerful, transformed.
Exactly. The sheer intensity of the subjective experience. The rush from the breathing, the triumph over the cold combined with the belief system makes it incredibly hard to disentangle true physiological change caused uniquely by the method from the profound effects of placebo, expectation, and the neurochemistry of enduring voluntary hardship.
Especially for outcomes like feeling less sick or subjective reports of well-being. Hard to measure objectively.
Very hard. Beyond placebo, there are just major data gaps. The most obvious is the lack of long-term studies.
Right. We have snapshots like the endotoxin study. What happens over years or decades of doing this?
We honestly don't know. Does the immune modulation effect persist? Does it require constant practice? Are there cumulative risks from repeatedly inducing severe respiratory alkalosis and adrenergic surges? The longitudinal data simply isn't there.
And the reproducibility issue you mentioned earlier.
Still a concern. The key findings, particularly the immune effects, haven't been robustly replicated by multiple independent labs on diverse populations. Until that happens, it remains preliminary.
So the method operates in this kind of scientific gray area. It clearly does something acute, triggering, measurable stress responses. But the claims about long-term health, unique benefits, and universal applicability, they're largely unproven.
Which brings us to another major methodological weakness, the lack of comparative efficacy studies. How does WHM stack up against other similar practices?
You mean, is it actually better than things that have been around longer or are less?
Precisely. Take Tummo meditation, for example. This Tibetan practice has existed for centuries, focusing on generating internal heat, inner fire, and resisting cold through breathwork and visualization. The goals are remarkably similar to WHM's cold endurance aspect.
So is WHM just a modern, westernized repackaging of Tummo, or does it offer something genuinely distinct or superior?
We don't know, because rigorous head-to-head comparisons haven't been done, or at least not published widely. The WHM narrative positions itself as pioneering, but it rarely acknowledges these potential predecessors in a comparative way.
What about the breathing, compared to other breathwork schools?
Good question. WHM uses extreme hyperventilation followed by holds. Other systems, like Buteyko breathing, advocate the complete opposite. Very slow, shallow breathing to increase CO2 tolerance. Both claim health benefits. We need comparative studies to understand which approach, if either, is optimal for specific goals and what the different risk profiles are.
Or even comparing WHM cold exposure to standard athletic cryotherapy.
Exactly. If the measurable benefits of WHM cold exposure, the BAT activation, the norepinephrine, are essentially the same as what athletes get from regular supervised ice baths or cryo chambers, but WHM adds the risks associated with the specific hyperventilation technique, then what's the unique selling proposition, physiologically speaking?
These comparisons seem crucial for establishing genuine value beyond the hype.
They are. But, as we'll discuss, the commercial incentives might not favor funding studies that could potentially show WHM isn't uniquely superior.
Which leads neatly into the danger of omission. What isn't being talked about in the mainstream promotion?
The risks. The promotional materials, the documentaries, the success stories. They overwhelmingly focus on the transformation, the empowerment, the defiance of limits. The potential downsides, the contraindications, the things that could go wrong, they tend to be minimized or completely omitted.
So Hof positions himself as the guinea pig who safely pushes boundaries, implying the method is inherently safe if you just commit.
That's often the subtle message. This culture of downplaying risk creates a dangerous knowledge gap, especially for beginners who might jump in without fully understanding the very real physiological hazards involved. The transformation story overshadows the safety warnings.
Okay, this feels incredibly important to underscore. We're not just talking about feeling a bit dizzy. The risks associated with the WHM, if instructions aren't followed or if someone has underlying conditions, are serious, potentially life-threatening.
They are absolutely non-trivial. Let's start with the breathing technique itself, Pillar 1. You described it as a chemical shock. I called it a physiological scalpel. It causes rapid, significant changes, especially in the brain.
How so? What's the primary danger there?
Remember the hypocapnia, the rapid blowing off of CO2. That low CO2 level directly causes blood vessels in the brain to constrict. It's called cerebral vasoconstriction.
So less blood flow to the brain moment by moment?
Acutely, yes. Reduced blood flow means reduced oxygen delivery to brain tissue. This is the direct cause of the common side effects like dizziness, lightheadedness, tingling.
Which people might interpret as part of the high or the process working.
Exactly. But if that vasoconstriction and oxygen reduction is severe enough, it can lead to syncope, fainting, loss of consciousness.
Okay, fainting on its own is risky. You could hit your head. But combine that with Pillar 2.
And you hit the single biggest, most acute danger, drowning risk.
Because people often practice this in or near water.
Yes. Ice baths, pools, lakes, even just a bathtub. If you faint during that breath retention phase while submerged, and fainting from hypocapnia can happen suddenly, without much warning, the outcome can be tragic. It's an undeniable hazard when combining breath holds with water immersion.
And are there other risks with the breathing, even out of water?
Yes. For individuals who might be predisposed, the intense physiological shifts, the pH changes, the electrolyte shifts, the stress hormone surges could potentially trigger seizures. This is rarely, if ever, mentioned in the popular guides.
Okay, so significant risks just from the breathing. What about the cold exposure, pillar 2? Even done gradually, it's still a stressor.
It is. The most obvious risk, especially for beginners or if someone pushes too hard too fast, is straightforward hypothermia. Your core body temperature drops to dangerous levels,
Even if you're trying to be careful.
especially if you're unmonitored or overestimate your adaptation. But perhaps a more common, insidious risk is the cardiovascular stress.
How does the cold stress the heart?
When you hit that icy water, you get an immediate cold shock response. Part of that response is massive, rapid peripheral vasoconstriction. All the blood vessels near the surface slam shut to conserve core heat.
Which would increase pressure in the system, right? Like squeezing a hose pipe.
Exactly. It causes an abrupt, significant spike in both heart rate and blood pressure.
Okay, now I see the dangerous synergy. If you're doing the breathing, you might already have cerebral vasoconstriction. Then you hit the cold, causing systemic vasoconstriction and a blood pressure surge.
It puts immense strain on the cardiovascular system. For someone with underlying heart issues or hypertension, this combination could potentially precipitate a cardiac event. It's a double whammy of vascular stress.
Which brings us to the absolute contraindications. Who should definitely not be doing this method according to the source material?
We need to be really clear here. The literature points to several absolute contraindications. If you have diagnosed cardiovascular disease, heart conditions, arrhythmias, history of stroke or uncontrolled high blood pressure, hypertension, the risks are likely too high. Same for epilepsy, given the seizure risk. And pregnancy is generally considered an absolute contraindication too, due to the extreme physiological shifts.
So heart conditions, high blood pressure, epilepsy, pregnancy, absolutely avoid.
That's the strong advice based on the physiological strain. Then there are relative contraindications where it's not an absolute no, but extreme caution and ideally medical consultations are needed.
Such as?
Conditions like asthma, severe cold can trigger bronchospasm. Migraine sufferers, the vascular changes could be a trigger. People with significant anxiety disorders, the intense physical sensations might exacerbate anxiety or panic. And circulatory issues like Raynaud's phenomenon, where blood flow to extremities is already compromised.
The problem, it seems, is getting this crucial safety information out there effectively.
That's the safety protocol gap. Because the method is often framed in this anti-establishment, you know your body best rhetoric, there's a resistance to standardized safety screening and protocols.
Right. Unlike, say, a medical procedure or even supervised physical training, there's often no formal screening process, no consistent medical oversight advice, no individualized adaptation plans based on health history.
The responsibility gets pushed entirely onto the individual user, who is simultaneously being told they can achieve the extraordinary and push their limits.
It's a risky combination. Empowering rhetoric coupled with minimized risk disclosure.
The rebel narrative actively undermines the development of the rigorous safety culture you'd expect for an intervention that induces such extreme physiological states.
Okay, so we've looked at the method, the claims, the science, or lack thereof, and the risks. Now let's talk about the system itself. Because the Wim Hof method isn't just a technique passed down freely, it's a business, a significant one.
A very significant one. And understanding the commercial structure is key to deconstructing the whole phenomenon. It reveals the engine driving the narrative and, arguably, creating a form of dependency.
So let's follow the money. How is this rebellion against conventional limits monetized?
It's a multi-layered model. Quite sophisticated, really. It starts with accessible entry points. The main one is the online courses offered through the official WHM Academy.
The self-paced video courses.
Exactly. These usually cost somewhere in the range of, say, $200 to $400. They provide the basic techniques, the structure, the foundational Hof philosophy. This is how they capture a wide audience and convert initial interest into financial commitment.
The volume play, get lots of people in the door.
Right. But the real money and the deeper level of commitment comes from the premium experiences.
What does that involve?
We're talking about live workshops, often led by certified instructors, weekend retreats, sometimes even expeditions or master classes potentially involving Wim Hof himself or sister figures.
And the price point for those?
Significantly higher, often $1,000 plus, sometimes much more depending on the duration and location. These promise deeper insights, personalized guidance, the group energy, and closer access to the source.
So a tiered system drawing people further in.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. There's merchandising, branded clothing, towels, gear. There's a whole instructor certification pathway, which itself costs money and creates a network of promoters. And increasingly, they're targeting businesses.
The corporate wellness angle.
Yes, selling WHM training programs to companies as a way to boost employee resilience, focus, and productivity, tapping into that huge corporate wellness market.
It's a well-oiled machine, and it's all underpinned by this powerful ideological alignment, isn't it?
Completely. It taps directly into the zeitgeist of biohacking, self-optimization, peak performance culture. It promises a shortcut, a radical transformation in a world where many people feel stressed, disconnected, or unhealthy.
But here's the twist, the hypocrisy of rebellion that you mentioned earlier.
This is what's fascinating. The whole brand narrative is built on anti-establishment rhetoric. It's positioned against conventional medicine, against perceived societal weakness, against the comfort zone. It's about reclaiming primal power.
You're fighting the system. Be strong, don't be soft.
Right. But how do you access this rebellion? You access it through a highly structured, standardized, commercialized system. You pay the company. You follow their specific trademarked method. You might even pay for certification within their hierarchy.
So to rebel against the establishment, you have to buy into a new, privately owned establishment.
That's the beautiful irony, isn't it? It creates dependency on the very guru structure it claims to liberate you from. You need their courses, their instructors, their brand to properly unlock the anti-establishment secrets.
Which leads us to the core dependency mechanic. How does it keep people hooked beyond just the initial results?
It cleverly blends the tangible with the intangible. The physiological claims, the adrenaline, the potential immune modulation they provide, the initial scientific hook, and measurable feedback. You feel something happening.
But that's not enough to justify the ongoing cost and commitment for many.
Exactly. The real long-term glue, the justification for the premium prices and continued engagement, is the promise of subjective transcendental experiences. It's the talk of awakening, transformation, connecting to your inner power, spiritual breakthroughs.
Things that are incredibly powerful personally, but also completely unquantifiable scientifically.
Precisely. And because they're unquantifiable, they can be endlessly sought after. These profound subjective feelings get synthesized with the limited scientific data. You attribute your feeling of empowerment partly to the verifiable adrenaline spike, but also partly to this mystical awakening that the method, and only the method as taught by the system, can supposedly deliver.
So you pay for the biology, but you stay for the biography, the story you tell yourself about your transformation.
That's a great way to put it. The system sells the feeling of becoming superhuman, of mastering yourself. And maintaining that feeling, chasing that peak experience, often means staying engaged with the method, the community, and therefore the commercial ecosystem that provides it. It's a powerful loop.
Okay, so we've picked apart the narrative, the science, the risks, the business model. Let's try to synthesize this. What are the grounded, evidence-based conclusions we can actually draw about the Wim Hof method, stripping away the hype?
Well, first, let's acknowledge it's not nothing. The method clearly does induce powerful, acute physiological changes. That's undeniable.
Right. We can say with confidence that the WHM does demonstrate measurable effects on the autonomic nervous system. That adrenergic spike, the sympathetic activation, is real and significant.
Correct. It's a tool to voluntarily trigger a massive stress response. Secondly, regarding the immune system, we can say modulation is present, at least acutely.
As seen in things like the reduced inflammatory markers in that endotoxin study.
Yes, but we need to be precise. This seems to be acute stress response modulation using adrenaline to temporarily dampen inflammation, rather than necessarily conferring long-term targeted immune control or enhancement in a broader sense. The exact mechanisms, scope, and duration are still not fully clear.
It's like hitting the brakes hard during an emergency, not necessarily upgrading the entire braking system for everyday driving.
Good analogy.
Yeah.
And thirdly, the benefits of cold adaptation, the BAT activation, the norepinephrine increases, the improved thermoregulation. These seem largely consistent with what we know from general cryotherapy research. They are legitimate physiological adaptations to cold stress.
So the WHM provides a specific protocol to achieve those known adaptations.
Exactly. But, and this is a crucial counterpoint, the risks associated with the method, particularly the breathing technique combined with water, or for susceptible individuals, are significant and require much better communication and management than is often apparent.
Okay, so that's what we do know with some confidence. What are the biggest priority knowledge gaps? What do we still desperately need to find out?
Several key things. Number one, durability of effects. How long do any benefits last if you stop practicing? Do the BA changes persist? Does the stress resilience remain? Or do you need constant practice to maintain the effects, keeping you tied to the method?
That's huge. Is it a permanent upgrade or a temporary boost requiring constant fuel?
We don't know. Number two, optimal dosing and individualization. The current approach is quite one-size-fits-all. But surely the optimal frequency, intensity, duration of breathing or cold exposure varies based on age, health status, genetics, goals. We need data to personalize protocols safely and effectively.
Instead of just do 3 rounds and take a cold shower.
Right. And number 3, we need a much deeper understanding of the mechanisms behind the subjective experiences. What exactly is happening neurologically and psychologically that creates these profound feelings of transformation, control, and well-being, moving beyond correlation to causation?
Which points towards the need for a change in future regulatory focus and research direction.
Absolutely. If WHM wants to be taken seriously as a therapeutic or health-enhancing modality, beyond just a wellness trend, it needs to embrace more rigorous scientific scrutiny, meaning large-scale, well-designed, randomized controlled trials, RCTs, comparing WHM to both placebo and active control groups, like other breathing techniques or standard cold therapy, for specific health outcomes. We also need long-term adherence and safety studies tracking people over years.
Moving beyond those initial, small, exciting pilot studies.
Way beyond. And ethically, there's a critical need for clearer risk communication in all materials and teaching, full transparency about contraindications and potential dangers, plus much stricter marketing guidelines around therapeutic claims. You can't just imply you can cure diseases based on preliminary data.
So bringing it all together, we've seen the method triggers real stress responses, similar in some ways to other known techniques like cryotherapy. We've seen the risks are significant and often downplayed. And we've seen a commercial system built around a charismatic figure selling both the technique and a narrative of rebellion and transformation.
Which brings us right back to that central tension. The system leverages the power of voluntary hardship, the feeling of overcoming, and attributes it specifically to this method, guided by this guru structure.
So here's the final thought, the question that lingers after pulling back the curtain. Given that the core verifiable benefits the stress hormone spikes, the cold adaptations seem linked to well-understood physiological principles activated by intense stress or cold.
Principles accessible through other means, potentially safer or free means.
Exactly. Is the primary value people get truly from the unique, specific mechanics of the Wim Hof method itself? Or is the greater, perhaps more compelling value derived from the belief system? The narrative, the charismatic leadership that convinces you you're unlocking something profound and defiant, thereby justifying the commitment, the cost, and maybe even the risk.
Where does the method end and the myth begin? That's the deconstructionist's question.
And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. So we've deconstructed the Wim Hof method. Now the real question is, in your own pursuit of health and transformation, what's one scientifically proven claim you've accepted without questioning, and what would it look like to finally put it on the chopping block this week?
Let us know in the comments. Question the narrative, deconstruct the dogma, see the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical.